Welcome back from our introduction to the course. As I mentioned before, and as you already know, this is a course on apologetics in Christian ministry. And what we're going to do to begin with this term is to look at a fairly recent book by Os Guinness, a book called Fool's Talk. And I think it's a very, very helpful book for looking at the whole issue of apologetics in terms of the ministry of a church, as well as the apologetics ministry of individuals as we seek to witness to people. Guinness is an old friend of mine, not literally, never met the man, but I've been reading his books since The Dust of Death came out many years ago, and he has always been very helpful. He's a creative writer, has written fictional works as well as works on apologetics and culture and ethics and those kinds of things. And so whenever a new book comes out that Guinness has written, I always look forward to taking a look at what he has had to say. And so I hope that you will enjoy the book. In this lecture, we're going to talk about chapter 1 and just give a little bit of an introduction to the man and what he's trying to accomplish in this very helpful book. Guinness was a member of the community at L'Abri. Some of you are familiar with Francis Schaeffer, probably all of you are, and you may be familiar with the fact that Schaeffer and his wife Edith had a ministry in Switzerland known as L'Abri. It was a chateau, and oftentimes American and European young people would go there, especially many disaffected middle and upper class young people who were sort of wandering through Europe trying to find themselves. I think I'd probably find myself in some of the great Reformation cities of Germany and England and places like that, but these people didn't know what they were looking for, and so they would wind up there. And Guinness was not quite in that category. He had been an honest searcher for some time. He gives a little biographical information in the book. But he was, for a number of years, then associated with Schaeffer. Schaeffer, of course, passed away, and Guinness has carried on the ministry of Schaeffer, and really not just that, but his own ministry for all of these years since then. And this is his latest offering. It really is a sort of a grand work on apologetics. And in the introduction and chapter 1, he talks about the fact that we live in a unique age today. We live in what he calls sort of a grand age of apologetics. And by that he means is that everybody is everywhere and everyone is an apologist, primarily because of the internet and because of social media. And I think that that's a generally true kind of statement. It's a little overstatement, obviously. Not even everyone on Facebook is an apologist for themselves, because a lot of people post unicorns. I don't think they really think they're unicorns, but there's some truth, some sense in which that is true, and I think that we should take that very seriously, because probably everybody in this class is on social media. Most of the people in your church who are under the age of 50 or maybe 60 or so. I've had octogenarians on Facebook in my churches in recent years, so it's pretty much pervasive. And there's some things in this chapter that I really like, and I want to take just the next few minutes to highlight them and hope that you will notice them as you read through the chapter. I love what he says about the fact that there's no cookie cutter approach to apologetics or to evangelism, and then we have a sense of a lack of persuasion when it comes to presenting the case for the gospel, not just apologetically, in the way we normally think of what apologetics is, but in a broad sense. And hopefully by the time we're done with the book, and even a little bit by the time we're done with this lecture, we're going to see that apologetics is a broader issue than a lot of folks think it is. In fact, these days you go on Facebook or Twitter, and you're liable to run across one of those little links that says 10 arguments that you can use to convert any atheist. And I remember years ago, that's what the sort of thing that I was looking for. because you could memorize those 10 things. And then if you're getting on a plane in Birmingham, and say in Atlanta, I'm flying to Baltimore, which is a route that I've flown many times. You got about 90 minutes, so you got 10 arguments. That's about 8 minutes per argument, plus time to shake hands, introduce yourself, get a Diet Coke, and then get ready for the touchdown. 8 minutes you can per argument you can convince an atheist. Well, if you've ever tried those approaches to apologetics, you know that they rarely have much benefit. There's been a lot of them I've noticed lately. 15 reasons from the Bible to prove that the resurrection is true that nobody could ever refute. You're going to have a lock on this one, and those who are having the conversation with you, your dialogue partners, will just sit there with their mouth open and say, brothers, what must we do to be saved now? Those approaches are what someone like Guinness is trying to steer us past, and I think rightfully so. And he says what we really lack is persuasion. We might have arguments, and we might be able to present evidence that demands a verdict, not to disparage Josh McDowell's book, which I've used many times, but we do lack persuasion. And he talks in here about something that I think is really important. It's a good way to begin this semester and a good way to begin this term of looking at evangelism through apologetics, and that is that we need to be seen as advocates of the hearts, or what he calls, to use an existential approach to advocacy. In other words, not existential in the way that Kierkegaard or Sartre or Heidegger or someone like that might use existentialism, but an existential approach in the sense that it appeals to people at the level of where they live, their existence. It's not about winning arguments, it's about winning people. And that should always be the apologetic task of individuals. And also the church. And as you read through the book, I think you'll get the picture that he's not just talking about this as being an individualistic kind of thing, but rather this is for churches in their ministries. And one of the key elements that pervades the final half of the chapter is his discussion of subversion, of the fact that we subvert people's expectations through surprise. In other words, that we use persuasive techniques and persuasive arguments that grow out of that existential encounter that we've had with the gospel that could have the same kind of an impact on the people that we're talking to. And he points to a number of passages. He starts with some in the Old Testament, in the book of 1 Kings, where prophets subverted their king Ahab, through surprising messages. Jesus does this all the time, especially in the parables. We have read the Bible for so many years and learned in a vacation Bible school and Sunday school, which I would always advocate that, but we've become so familiar with it, it doesn't surprise us anymore. And those stories, the narratives about Christ, and especially the parabolic narratives, are intended to surprise. They surprised the people of that day. They didn't expect that the father would not only welcome the prodigal back, but would also rebuke his older brother for his attitude. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is another one of those subversive kind of things. I try to think about this as I was reading through the chapter. I think about persuasion through subversion in my own lifetime. I'm 61 years old as I'm recording this particular video, and I grew up in the civil rights movement, not in the South. I lived in Colorado, so I did not have the kind of personal investment in maintaining Southern culture and all that some of my friends would have later on in life as I moved to the South. But I remember the approach of Dr. King. I remember his being jailed in Birmingham in '63 and the beautiful letter that he wrote. I remember the I Have a Dream speech. I remember all those things, and that was a time of political turmoil. So I also recall Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X, and then at the 1968 Democratic National Convention, Abby Hoffman and the Yippie movement and all of that. And here were people who were beating their heads against a wall and beating their heads against each other and beating other people's heads with sticks, trying to persuade them. And then on the other end of the spectrum here is Dr. King. And he persuaded through other means. And I remember, even though I grew up in the home of a father who had grown up in the South and had inherited the racial tendencies, even racist tendencies, I guess I should say, of Southern life, that I was persuaded by King. And we used to have sometimes the beat your head against each other arguments around the dinner table. 5 truths that he wants to communicate here, and I think this is really nice. This is not quite what you would get if you took a systematic theology course or even a biblical theology course. And I'll let you read the rationale he gives for each one, but he wants to communicate this apologetic approach through an emphasis on creation, that's reason, fall, the fact that we're all in denial against God, incarnation, that points us to the fact that persuasion is face-to-face and person-to-person, the cross, and this is where the title Fool's Talk comes in, keying off of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and 2 and following. Then the Holy Spirit as God's endless persuader and the one upon whom we depend if any of our apologetics persuasion is to be effective. So here we are. We're getting started. Next time when we come back, we'll move on through the book by Guinness. Hope you'll enjoy it.